Hello, everybody. My name is Amalia Weber. I'm the program specialist here at Rochester Hills Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program, Hiking Michigan Trails. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Firstly, tonight's program will be recorded and available to view about 1 week from tonight on our YouTube page and on the RHPL website shortly after. We ask that audience members please silence or turn off their cell phones before we begin in order to avoid any disturbances during the presentation. The Friends of the RHPL 8th Annual Wine, Wit, and Wisdom Fundraiser is taking place on Saturday, April 29th. The event takes place here at the library from 6 to 9:30 p.m. Audience members will attend 2 speaker presentations from a choice of 6, and the evening also includes a buffet dinner, drinks, including wine, beer, and soft drinks, a silent auction, and a 50-50 raffle. Registration forms are available at the circulation desk, or you can visit rhpl.org/friends for more information. Our next program is Mushroom Foraging and Safety, which will be an in-person event on Tuesday, April 13th at 7 p.m. You can sign up for that at calendar.rhpl.org. And now, without further ado, please welcome our presenter, Celia Ryker.
Okay, what I plan to do this evening is talk to you a little bit about the hike I did, what prompted me to do this, the book I've written about it, and read a few pieces, and share some stories about the trail and the trails I discovered here in Michigan when I was getting ready to hike in Vermont. So you can see the long trail, it says here it's 270 miles, but we had to hike onto it and off of it. We did at least 300 miles, and it took us 8 years to finish it. We did it in sections. So if my friend who was hiking with me, if Sandy had 7 days, we'd put 7 days in. To do the whole thing in one shot, if you're fast, it's 2 or 3 weeks. If you're not, it's 4 or 5 weeks. I'm not the fastest. So Sandy and I did not set speed records. Now, when I told my father what I was going to do, I expected fatherly advice. Be careful, watch out for this. This is the man who taught me how to change a flat tire and to carry cash when I'm traveling, but never put different amounts in different pockets so you never pull out a wad of money. And he didn't say anything like that. He said, you are going to remember this trip for the rest of your life. He was very excited, and he wanted to see the things that I had acquired and how I was going to purify water and cook my food and see how heavy my pack was. So I thought what I'd do is begin by reading you the introduction. This should explain a few things. It was my 59th birthday, and as my waking brain realized what day it was, my mind jumped to a childish declaration made over a cake illuminated by 10 candles. I am halfway to 20. Aunt June turned from ice cream scooping and said, "Don't even say something like that." I guess she didn't want to think about children growing up because that would mean that she would age as well. But to me, being halfway to 20 was cool. Why do I remember that moment so vividly? And yesterday, I couldn't find my shoes. They're in the house somewhere. I know that getting old is what happens if you don't die young, but the idea of running out of time was both sobering and inspiring. On my 59th birthday, I made a list of the things I'd hoped to accomplish by then and had either failed or not attempted at all. I was alarmed by the length of that inventory. To keep from being depressed, I made a second catalog of achievements I had realized, and I was pleased with those numbers. But I'm not done yet. I took the first list and prioritized it. 2 projects vied for the top spot. My love of nature and the long trail had been calling me since my first visit to Vermont. And then there was my love for writing. I'd written short stories, journal entries, and poetry since I'd learned to hold a pencil, and had 2 unfinished books in literary limbo. Weighing these challenges, I decided that I could write when I was no longer able to walk. But distance hiking could not wait. I was halfway to 118 years old when I made the decision to hike the long trail. really need to stop counting in halfways. It's very depressing. So I decided to hike the long trail, and a young lady who lived around the corner from us here in Michigan came to visit her family. She had moved to Tennessee, and I told her what I was going to do, and when she went back to Tennessee, she emailed me and said, "Do you want somebody to hike with?" And you can probably see that Sandy's a few years younger than me, like 20, and you can't tell very well in that picture, but she's also 8 inches taller than I am. So I was busy catching up with her all the time. So you could see on that first picture that it was a sunny day, and the people who dropped us off said it's been raining every day for 2 weeks. And I thought, okay, got it out of its system and we're good to go. Well, it stayed nice and sunny for about an hour. We hiked for 7 days and we did not have 24 hours without a major rainfall. And some days it rained all day. This was in July. Yeah. And I thought the trail was going to be a nice little walk. This is the trail. If you can see the white marker on the tree up here, the trail comes in on your right and then goes up. That is the trail. That's what we're walking in. And when you try not to walk on the trail, which you shouldn't really do because it's not good for nature, you sink into mud. So we learned to just walk on the mud, through whatever was there. And one of the first nights out, we were at Greenwall, and everybody has trail names. Moose Jaw and Duct Tape were talking about how the fact that they thought the long trail was the most difficult hiking trail. They were debating whether it was the most difficult hiking trail in the United States or in North America. They were comparing it to hikes here and in Canada and Mexico. And this is the trail Sandy and I picked to start with. And this is the trail. You have to take off your pack and crawl through there and either pull your pack along or push it out ahead of you. The further north you go, the more difficult it is. And when we found out how hard it was, I told Sandy, I said, we're on the easy part. And it took us 7 hours to walk 7 miles. We did not make the kind of time we were hoping to make. And the shelters, this is what most of the shelters look like. This is a brandy new one. And there will be 12 or 14 people sleeping there. That's why I like my tent. And you can see the sticks and tin cans so you can hang your pack up. This little thing will hold that pack up. And some people think that will keep it from bear, but I just have to tell you, a bear would have to stand on his hind legs, and that's it. And some of them had more luxurious accommodations. This had bunks and a table and a little porch, and you can see everything's wet all the time. And this one, we have a real lodge. It had an upstairs loft, and it had a lovely table. Yes, but it had windows and doors and everything. So, oops, I got off again. I can see it. This is from Puffer Lodge. This is the view from Puffer Shelter. It was a very small shelter, and no one else was there but Sandy and I. And in the morning, looking east to the White Mountains in New Hampshire, the sunrise was fabulous. And that's my tent on the right, Sandy's on the left. I love my tent. Keep moving. All right, this was the first time. The first day we thought we were going to go about 12 miles, maybe 15. And we got to the first shelter in 7 hours and decided that's enough. On this day we were at the Kid Gore shelter, and it was the first shelter we got to that we didn't have to stop for the night. And we had lunch, and this is Sandy's lunch. You can see it's pita bread and tuna fish and elk sausage, and the Ziploc baggies are full of peanut butter. And we decided on this trip that peanut butter, you weigh everything. Peanut butter is heavy. And also, it's hard to eat out of plastic bags. During our conversation, Sandy had peanut butter on her cheek and her forehead. So that was the only trip for the peanut butter. That's Sandy's lunch. And we're constantly looking at our maps. You can see the variation in elevation there. After we finished the hike, my husband said, "So how many mountains did you summit?" And we went back to our map and counted. We summited 52 mountains to finish this trail.
What year did you start the hike?
I started the hike in 1989. That's my lunch. You pack all your heavy equipment in the bottom of your pack, and I didn't want to pull everything out for lunch. So I had a Clif Bar in my one pocket and Gorp in the other. You may call it trail mix. On the trail, they call it Gorp, good old raisins and peanuts. And Sandy made the best Gorp. Hers had dried apricots and little marshmallows. Mine, I bought the trail mix at the grocery store and threw in some more M&Ms. But that was my lunch. And this is at White Rock. This is a spot in Vermont where it just looks like somebody took a bunch of light-colored rocks and threw them into the woods. You can see we're in an evergreen forest. I believe this was mainly hemlock. And it's just beautiful. And this, we're getting further north, Devil's Gulch. There was a spot before we got there. You're on rocks that there's lots of space in between them, and I thought if I dropped my trekking pole, it would just disappear. And at one point, I got my foot caught between two rocks because they wobbled, and I couldn't get it out, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna have to take off my boot. And as I was leaning down to take off my boot, it felt like somebody pushed my boot up out. And I have to tell you, I looked in to see if someone was down there. But I just relaxed enough so it just popped right out. But the further north we went, the more difficult the trail was. Well, pay attention. Now, while I was training to do this, I discovered trails here in Michigan. If you want to hike in Michigan, I definitely recommend Jim DeFresny's book. This is great. This is a guy who hiked the trails. He didn't read about it and tell you what it is. And he not only tells you what the trails are like, he tells you how to get to the trailhead. Because sometimes I found some and I thought, okay, this is great, but I don't know how to get there. So I really found it very informational enough so I tore pages out for maps and keep them tucked back in there. And I tracked how many of these hikes I've done. And this is on one page. I have a lot more to do, but we have great hiking here in Michigan. And I didn't know it until I started to get ready to hike in Vermont. So the North Country Trail goes from North Dakota through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula, deep into Ohio, across Pennsylvania, into New York, and they just connected it to the Long Trail. It's over 3,000 miles. And it's flat. The first weekend I did on this trail, I was already hiking on the Long Trail. The first and only time I got blisters. The trail was so flat that I'm just walking the same way all day. And I was hiking with people from the Sierra Club, and Eva said, when you're hiking flat like this, move your foot in your boot a lot, and every time you stop, take your boot off and reset your sock and reset your boot. I learned that after I had 2 blisters on each foot on an easy trail. And this is about the halfway mark for the North Country Trail. You can see it's about 1,600 miles back to the Dakota and about 1,600 miles to the terminus in New York, and it has since added to that. And they had a shower and everything here. This was really upscale. In New England, in Vermont and New Hampshire, where I was hiking, all the walls were made out of, all the fence lines were made out of stone. Here we found a lot of fence lines that had been made out of the roots of the trees that were pulled out to make this a pasture. You can see the trees there are all about the same age. And that's how long it's been since this was used by a farmer. But I just found that interesting. And hiking with my friend Barb, she saw every little thing. She saw every little bit of scat. And so I gave her the trail name of Poopsie, because she saw all the poop. This is not a deer track. You can tell by the size of the hoof there, the print. We did see one moose while we were hiking. Sandy was out in front of me, as usual. She looked over just as this bull moose looked at her. She got behind a tree and decided to try to get a picture, and it ran back toward me. She gave a shout, and I hid behind a tree and watched it go out of sight about where that table is. I thought, that's as close as I want to get to a charging moose. He was gargantuan. And I think he looked a little bigger when he was running. But I thought I'd read another small piece here. Now, here it is the following summer, and I'm camping next to a fallen privy, wide awake and listening to the snoring coming from Sandy's tent. She could fall asleep like that every time. She's sound asleep, and I'm going, ah, in minutes. She'd fallen asleep quickly, and I should have done the same, but that didn't happen. I imagined Mickey Mouse counting cartoon sheep jumping over his cartoon bed, but that didn't help. A barred owl called in the distance, and I laughed to myself, thinking, maybe I should be counting owls. Number 1 was my very first owl sighting. I never got to number 2 because number 1 brought its own story to mind. My 12-year-old legs didn't have to go far to find wooded areas to search for wildlife. Clarkston was less developed in the early 1960s. Where a sprawling medical center now stands, there had been an open field, the result of an abandoned building site. This flat area was used by the traveling circus when it came to town, and we hurried out after it left to see if we could find elephant poop or tiger fur where their cages had been. I walked this area often, going to and from the store. Evening was approaching as I strolled home with a small bag of groceries Mom was waiting for. Midway across the open lot edged by woodland, I stopped in my tracks. An enormous silhouette loomed in a tree a few yards away. It looked like someone had chopped off Batman's head and plopped it on a tree branch. I don't know how long I stood there waiting for that bird to move. The owl sat huge and foreboding in the twilight, and I waited, hoping to see it fly, while wishing it would stay there as long as I stood still. Finally, I had to move. It was nearly dark, and being home before dark was a must. I was walking sideways and nearly fell over when Batman's head lifted itself into the air and flew into the forest. Sandy's snoring grew faint, and my memories faded to black. That was right there in Clarkston near the M15 Dixie Highway intersection. And that owl was just so impressive. I just thought that was the coolest thing. And it made me want to do more walking around in the woods. Now, I've written a second book, my novel about my grandmother's life is also here. She shows up in my hiking book. She taught me not to be afraid of snakes by teaching me how to catch them and showing me how beautiful they were. And a blue racer, I mean, look at that. It's like a sports car. It doesn't have to move for you to know it's fast. I just think they're amazing. And we are so lucky to have all this fresh water. When I show this to people in Vermont and New Hampshire, they go, you're at the ocean. Where did you hike at the ocean? I said, that is fresh water, folks. That is something you don't get to see much. And we were hiking, this was at Nordhaus Dunes. We hiked out in the woods along the edge of the lake. Beautiful walk. And here I want to, if you're thinking about doing this, when we were hiking here it was on a weekend, there were lots of people camping. So I had to go quite a ways to get some privacy for a bio break. And then I came back and I was disoriented and I walked into the wrong campsite. I did find my campsite, but one of the things I do when I'm hiking on the trail is I never get out of sight of my pack. I leave my pack on the trail, and if I'm hiding behind a tree, I can look over and there's my pack. This is where most people get lost. There was a woman hiking alone on the Appalachian Trail who went off trail with her pack. They found her 2 years later in her tent, 100 yards from the trail. So don't lose sight of the trail. I definitely think that's a plus. What I did the next time I went out for a bio break, I dragged a big stick in the sand. You can see how sandy it is. And I followed my trail back. But be careful, folks. And the sunset on Lake Michigan is fabulous. Now, the next day, we were supposed to go back the same way. There had been a storm, and we were going over and under a lot of trees and things that had fallen. And we took a vote, and everybody voted to walk back on the beach. I was one of 2 people who said, no, let's stay in the woods. And here we are walking on the beach. Walking in the sand carrying a pack is hard. I didn't want to walk, I didn't want my boots, I love my boots. And they get wet enough if they have to, so I stayed in the sand. And after, I don't know, about 100 yards, they said, can we go back in the woods? And Eva said, no, you made this decision, we're staying out here. So we walked, you can see, we had a long walk on the sand. And this is Poopsie again. We're at Hoist Lake. If you're doing, you think you just maybe want to try it, Hoist Lake is a great place to hike. Pretty easy hike. It's really pretty along the lake. And it's flat, and I didn't get any blisters this time. And you can drive in here and then hike the loops without carrying all the pack and things, but you miss half the fun. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot. Where am I? Got to get in the right place. That Hoist Lake is, I think it's up near, I'd have to look in that book. I think it's up near Cadillac. I'm not sure. I know Red Bridge is. And that's another of my favorite hikes. Now, this is Isle Royale. If you get a chance to hike Isle Royale, do it. Every campsite is gorgeous. And because it's an island and you go on and off with the ferry boats, they leave the moose antlers there they end up just deteriorating over time because you can't really take all these artifacts off. And we're at Wendigo. We flew into the western end of the island the day after a storm. The worst part of my whole trip, the flight. It was like being on a butterfly. And I don't have asthma attacks very often, but I did there. My friends were saying, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'll be okay." But the rest of the hike was great, but the flight was a little shaky. And that's looking up to Thunder Bay in Canada. Now, we're 19 miles from Thunder Bay. We're not that far from that little jutting point of Minnesota. But because Michigan became a state first, the powers that be wanted this island because it had copper. And so it came with Michigan, although it's 49 miles to Houghton. And the wildlife are used to us, so you get to see pileated woodpeckers, and fox will just kind of walk on by. And the park ranger said, keep everything in your tent. Don't leave your boots outside your tent. The porcupines love to eat the inside of your boots, the salt from your perspiration. And don't leave your trekking poles out. The fox swiped them. They found a den that had 6 trekking poles in it. So the animals have become accustomed to the hikers. And this is at Lake DeSoar. The first thing I do when I get into camp, we set up our tent and then change out of our boots into our Crocs. You can see my Crocs under the... You put those on, you can go sit in the water with your feet, sit on a rock in the water, and use your pump to refill your water bottles and bladder for the pack. And I'm always the first one up, so In the morning, the loons at Lake Desor were showing off. Just thought that was beautiful. Day 2, I knew it was going to be difficult because I knew Eva, I had hiked with her several times, and we did a 5-mile day. If she's doing 5 miles, it's not going to be easy. And we were on rock all day. And although it wasn't like the mountains, if you're on rock all day, it does make your feet a little tired. But we got a great view looking up toward Canada. Does Bev look a little tired? That was after the 5 hours, we set up our camp and then we went for a walk. We walked another 3 miles out and back to go to the copper mine. And there are a lot of artifacts there. You can see the old rail from when they were removing the copper, and we took a break on the slag pile. And I think this was the metalworker, the blacksmith shop. I couldn't think of the word blacksmith. Hello. I could hide my own Easter eggs. I've got a bad memory. And this is Daisy Farm. Beautiful, again, another beautiful campsite. And I'm always the first one up in the morning. And I got to see the sunrise, and the fog was rolling in, the mergansers flying in the fog, and it made it even more spectacular. I thought, this is so beautiful. Stop it. And then I went back to camp. Everybody was still asleep. I sat down, and I didn't hear anything coming. But I looked up, and about where that back wall is, I heard this, and I looked up, and there's a moose right there. And I mean, he's gargantuan. And did I get out the camera that's in my pocket and take a great picture? No, I yelled moose so my friends could come out and hear him crashing through the woods. But he didn't make a lot of noise when he left. But they have a lot of wolf and moose, no bear, no coyote. And the island is monitored by Michigan State University, has a study group studying the moose and wolf populations. And that's our way home. I was going to read another piece. That is Ranger. That's how we're going back. I'm not going on a plane, thank you. It's going to take 6 hours. There's a quicker boat. I can't remember the name of it, but its nickname was the Vomit Comet. I was glad we were taking 6 hours. I'd like to read another small piece here. Sandy and I were the only people at the Lulatai shelter. Within my dark tent, the quiet of the forest was disturbed by an animal moving outside, inches from my ear. I couldn't see what was rustling through the leaves so close to my fabric home. But Sandy had her rain fly flip back, and she could see what I could not. Sandy, do you see something near my tent? She shone her headlamp in my direction. It's a rabbit. It sounds like a rhinoceros. It sounded huge. The moon was bright, and the shadows of individual leaves were crisp against my tent flap. A slight breeze created the visual effect of a folio kabuki dance. It was just beautiful. I was lying there, mesmerized by the show, when a loon's call floated from Little Rock Pond. Oh, great sound to go with this fabulous visual. Beyond Sandy's tent, 2 barred owls called to one another. A screech owl some distance off enhanced the audio, creating a triangle of woodland sounds. I envisioned the forest full of night birds. I was waiting for sleep when I heard a sound that sat me straight up. No, it wasn't a bear or a rhinoceros, but an owl that I'd never heard before. It made a single, deep, resonant hoot. Could it be a great gray owl? They're rare, and they don't call as often as some owls, but I think they hoot in little groups, not a single call. I sat in the darkness, straining to hear it again. I was about to give up when I heard it, a single call, deep and close. That's a big owl. It wasn't a great horned owl. I've heard them before. It may not have been a great gray, but I'm going to remember it as such until someone informs me to the contrary. I didn't hear it again, so I lay back in my sleeping bag, thinking that the night couldn't have been any better. But I was wrong. 2 barred owls moved in and began chatting, one in the beech tree near Sandy's tent and one in the maple next to mine. Nestled against the forest floor, I drifted towards sleep listening to a barred owl serenade. My sleepy thoughts turned to my dad's prediction. You will remember this for the rest of your life. And I'm sure I will. Now, I read this piece to someone in Vermont, and two gentlemen in the back said, you know, bears hoot. And I thought, one guy said it, I thought he was joking, and the other guy said, no, they do, they hoot. I was so glad I didn't know that night, because that one, the second one, remember I said it was deep and close? Yeah, it could have been a bear, I don't know. But they're the only two I've heard that from, so. But this is leaving Rock Harbor. It does look like we're leaving a town on the coast, on the East Coast. Just so beautiful, and it's fresh water. Now, those of you who are thinking about hiking here in Michigan, again, I recommend getting some help. Or what I did is, before I set out, I did some weekends with Sierra Club members, which was very helpful. Eva was great. I learned how to set up my tent and not have it fill up with water. The first time I set my tent up, one of the other hikers came over and she said, you know, the underside of your tent isn't waterproof. You have to get the top, the fly over it, or it's going to be wet. And of course it did rain, and I would have been wet if they hadn't done that. Now, I think the Manistee River Trail I call it the Red Bridge Trail. That's up near Cadillac, and that's a great weekend hike. Don't do it on a holiday. It's so crowded. It's a wonderful hike. You're along the river. We went out on one side of the river, came back on the other side, went over the little bridge. It's a wonderful hike. What's the next one? Can you?
Waterloo Pinckney.
Waterloo Pinckney, yes. That's what we did. Is we parked cars and hiked from one to the other. We hiked from one park to the next. Spent 3 days. If you wanted to, you could park your car and go out and come back. What's the next one?
Hoist Lake.
Pardon me?
Hoist.
Hoist Lake. Okay, I told you about Hoist Lake. And what's the next one?
Reed Lake.
Pardon me?
Reed Lake.
Oh, Reed Lake, yes. That's another one like Hoist Lake. It's pretty simple, pretty easy. I'm going to get out here so I can see it. Nordhaus Dunes, that can be pretty tough. They didn't like me going over all those trees. And what's the next one? Pardon me? Oh, Jordan River. It's beautiful, and it's a little bit like the Red Bridge. You're hiking along the river, so you get to get up on the bluffs and down. They're great hikes. Is there another one there? Isle Royale. Okay. Well, we talked about that. Okay, so if you're new to this, I recommend going out with somebody who does know what they're doing, because if I had started this hike without doing the training hikes I did here in Michigan, I don't know if I would have had nearly as much fun. I may not have finished. But doing some weekend trips, getting to know your equipment and knowing what to take and what not to take. Because my pack the first time was so heavy. I think the first hike I did, my pack weighed 46 pounds. By the time I finished pack for a week, it weighed 24 pounds. Get rid of this, get rid of that, get rid of this. Oh, bring that back. But, so, and I do have a hiking partner that I wanted to show you. I always show a picture of Fleury. There's a reason I do training hikes with her. I do not take her on distance hikes. You see how little water there is there? And see what she looks like? That's what and she'd want to be I'd want her in my tent, but, and if she can't find something wet to roll in, she will find something that smells bad to roll in. So she's a sweet and wonderful dog, but I don't take her on distance hikes with me. Saw some people that had dogs that really seemed to like to hike. And I saw some that I thought, that dog is cringing because you're putting its pack on. One young man said he had sent his dog home because when he took out the dog carries his own food in his own bowl. And when he took out the dog's pack, he cowered, and he said, I'm not making him do that. So he called his sister, and she came and got the dog. But Flurry loves to walk. And the picture on my phone is of her with ferns all over her. So she's always covered with something. So if you have any questions or comments, yes? I took a little Rebel, one that you can drop on cement or put underwater, and it took pretty good pictures. A lot of the people just used their phones. A lot of the people that were hiking the Appalachian Trail, they had nothing but their phones, so they were not carrying anything they don't have to carry. And the phones can take some pretty good pictures now. Yes?
The shelters that you showed, do you pay for those?
No, no.
And is it first come, first?
No, it's fill up and then you have to sleep outside. On Isle Royale, if you get to a shelter, the shelters are three-sided with a screened front. And if you get to the shelter and you put your sign on it, it's yours. So that's a little different. You've got a little tag you take with you and you hang it up, and that's your shelter for however many people you have. But that's why I like my tent. It could get pretty crowded in the shelters. Yeah, they had tenting areas near shelters. Sometimes if you're closer to the mountain summits, you were on decks. You're on wooden decks, and you had to set it up with rocks and things. Not my favorite. Yes.
I'm the keys person.
Okay.
I was just wondering how you accumulated what you packed with you. How did you use a source to say these are the good things, or did you go to?
I had a friend who had done a lot of hiking, and she also had done a lot of packing, and she said, get this, get that. And when I told her I wanted to buy a pack, she said, here, borrow mine, and use mine for a few times. And when I went looking for packs, she said, don't tell them what you're doing, because they'll try to sell you a pack that you can carry everything you need for weeks, and then you have to carry it. She said, buy one, I think mine is 50, and I don't know what the heavier ones would carry, but I know when Wild, when she started, her pack was gargantuan and just chock-a-block full. I don't know if you know that book or that movie, but she started hiking the Pacific Crest Trail from Arizona to Canada before she ever picked up her pack or put on her boots.
Wow.
Yeah. Oops. So yeah, especially if you're older, I needed to train to do this. This is not premature. So.
Did you do anything to manage mosquitoes or black flies?
Only had one place where black flies were a problem and another spot where mosquitoes were a problem. And I did have some bug goop, but never saw a tick the whole time. Did not see a tick. Now, I saw ticks on our property in Vermont, but when I was hiking in Vermont along the trail, I didn't see a tick. So, yeah, only a couple of times, and I had some bug goop that I used, but there wasn't much. One time it was black flies, and one time it was mosquitoes. And they were brutal. Yes?
Actually, I have a couple of questions. How do you know which trails have shelters and which ones don't?
Even at this one, even the small here, he will indicate where the shelters are. And on my map of the long trail, which I don't have with me, that I showed you in the picture, it shows exactly where the shelters are. And it shows you on the part that shows how you walk it, and it also shows it when you're showing the elevation changes. It'll show you. And it's marked off by miles, so you can count off the miles looking at that and say, we've got 12 miles to that shelter. And it does describe, there is a trail guide that describes the shelters, tells you what they are and how, if it's a lodge or a shelter or No, no. There was a fellow who was doing that. He didn't carry a stove. He made a fire every night, and he was going all George of the Jungle. And he seemed to be doing fine, but most people had dried meals to rehydrate, and that's about it. The longest hike that I've in a straight, it was Isle Royale. But in the Lower Peninsula, it was the Pinckney Trail. I went from one park to the other, and we did a 38-mile hike. Mostly we were doing weekend hikes, so they were going to be in the 20 and 30-mile range. And I thought I'd show you this. This was my father thought this was the coolest thing. Some of you, I can tell, are hikers, but my father, when I showed him this, he thought this was the coolest thing that I can turn it on. I think this is getting low. Well, I'm not going to mess with it. Because usually it blasts right off, and it's called a jet boil. And Sandy brought some regular rice. I was just rehydrating meals. And I tried to cook real rice in here, and you need to turn it way down. And I think there's still marks in here from where it burned it. Everything tasted like burnt rice for a while. The thing my father thought was so cool was, yeah, this is just about empty. That's good. It all goes back together. And this is my bowl. And then my spork. My father thought that was the coolest thing. I think it's the coolest thing. And with these, there's so many different ways to purify water. Sandy's family owned a company that sold purifying products. And she said, this is what you want. And the nice thing is, you only need that much water. Some of them you have to dip into the water. And there are many times when you don't have much water to work with. It's just a little trickle. And you can use this to pump. Now you have to pump it. And this is how much water you get with each pump. So it's an exercise. You want to have your feet in the water and be enjoying yourself while you're doing that. So, any other questions? There are bookmarks up here if you'd like, and I'm told I can sell books if you want to buy a book. Augusta is about my grandmother's life. She does show up in the first book, and that image on the cover is one of there was a daguerreotype that my aunt gave me, and she said your grandmother was married off to the father of one of her classmates when she was 13, and this was taken on her wedding day, and she's wearing her 8th grade graduation dress. So her life was not easy, and I knew her as the magical woman that lived in the cottage on the lake and taught me not to be afraid of snakes, and so she does show up in both books.